What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to another video. This new camera angle makes me look a lot shorter than I actually am. I promise y'all I'm 6'5". But anyway, I got an interesting one for you guys today. I saw this article was written, looks like at the end of October, so I'm a little bit late to it, but I thought it was really interesting. One trade still haunting every NBA franchise, and they have this Joel Embiid, Jason Tatum picture on there, and that's probably because the Sixers famously traded, what was it? The Sixers they traded to get the first overall pick, took Markelle Fultz when the Celtics wanted Jason Tatum all along. So I guess Tatum and Embiid could have been on the same team. That would have been pretty nuts, right? That would have been a crazy combination. But I'm just curious to go through this list and reminisce on some trades that, in retrospect, haven't really worked out for these teams. Looks like the first one we got here is the Atlanta Hawks, and I already see that Luka and Trey is in it. The trade Luka Doncic to the Dallas Mavericks for Trae Young and Cam Reddish as a future pick. So yeah, just looking at it, this is a pretty easy trade to understand if you're the Hawks, right? You could have had Luka, you instead went and got Trey, and you got Cam Reddish. So I actually have experience against Cam Reddish. We went up against him in college. And Cam Reddish, I thought was going to be a lot better player than what he's turned out to be. I still see a lot of the skills that he possesses, but I don't think he was ever put in this right situation to where he could develop those skills. I think he would have been better if he would have had the ball a little more often because he had some handles. He could pass a little bit. We saw a little stretch of that when he was actually in Atlanta and they started giving him the ball a little bit more. You saw a lot of those numbers really start to uptick, but unfortunately he hasn't been able to find that spot again. But yeah, if we're just comparing Luka Doncic, Trae Young, you take Luka every single time. I'm not the biggest Trae Young fan, and I've said it before on the channel. Obviously, phenomenal offensive basketball player. But I don't know. I think there's a lot of negatives that come with him. Some of the shot selection is tough, and you live with that when you have a gifted offensive scorer like that. I mean, Luka takes crazy shots too, but I don't know. I just think you lose so much of it defensively with Trae that I just don't think it's worth it. I get the feeling that Trae Young is kind of going to be one of those guys like a James Harden where he's going to put up phenomenal numbers for a long time. And I'm not saying he's going to win an MVP, but more so it's a lot of like empty numbers on teams that don't have anybody else to score, and it's not actually going to translate to any playoff success. All right, next one here, the Boston Celtics. Desmond Bane to the Grizzlies and Enes Kanter to the Portland Trailblazers. Grizzlies get the 2023 and 2025 second round picks to the Boston Celtics in cash. Blazers trade Mario Hezonja to the Grizzlies. All right, so there's a lot to unpack with this one. So my understanding of this move was that because Desmond Bane went pretty close to the end of the first round there, so the Celtics traded one of their picks in order to stay away from the luxury tax as much as possible. And in doing so, basically this was a salary dump move for them so that they could acquire a couple more assets and stay under that salary cap threshold. But looking back at it, in this draft, I believe they took Peyton Pritchard and Aaron Nesmith, who Peyton Pritchard is having a pretty solid season so far, and Aaron Nesmith, who no longer with the Celtics, but has actually found a pretty good home and has gotten an extension with the Indiana Pacers. You know, two quality players, but neither of them nearly as good as Desmond Bane, right? And, you know, like the pick was probably, who knows if they actually would have taken Desmond Bane, right? Who knows where this was on their draft board and everything, but obviously we know Desmond Bane is now like a 20-plus point a game scorer, a phenomenal defender. He's got a little bit of playmaking skills. He's a great shooter. He's debatably, well, he probably is the third best player on the Grizzlies. But yeah, who knows if the Celtics actually take him with that pick. I don't know. I don't think this is as crazy of a loss for the Celtics. All right, the Brooklyn Nets, and we had a feeling it was going to be this one. Keith Bogans, Marshawn Brooks, Chris Humphries, Chris Joseph. I don't even know who Chris Joseph is. Gerald Wallace, 3 first-round picks and a first-round pick swap to the Celtics for KG, Paul Pierce, Jason Terry, DJ White, and a future second. So yeah, this is one of the most famous trades like ever, right? There were so many big names. I remember watching the draft when this happened, and I was like, oh, snap. The Nets now have a lineup of Darren Williams. It was Joe Johnson, Paul Pierce, KG, and Brook Lopez. Brook Lopez wasn't the player that he is now. He was a lot more offensive focused than defensive focused, and he was more of a post scorer at that point. But still, like, this team was crazy on paper, but we were like, oh my goodness, if this doesn't work out, they have nothing going forward because these guys are pushing retirement age, and it's a big risk. Now, I don't remember exactly where these Nets teams, like the furthest they ever got. Did they ever get past like the first or second round? I remember my Bulls beating them in that one round where they only had like 8 players healthy on the roster and Nate Robinson was just torching them. and they knocked him out in that first round series or whatever. But yeah, this trade was rough. Obviously, this turned into Jaylen Brown, I think, and Jason Tatum for the Celtics as well. So, like, just absolutely nuts what could have been. Funny enough, like, Brooklyn in this time where they had like no picks, they couldn't get any talent, they still managed to like make a decent little comeback of things. Like, they picked up on this strategy of saying like, hey, I can go get this player and this player. I'll take these bad contracts off your hands if you give us like some draft compensation or something. So they ended up with guys like D'Lo and stuff, right? They found guys like Spencer Dinwiddie, and they ended up putting together like a decent little team. They ended up drafting Jared Allen because that, I believe. I think they traded Kyle Kuzma and got something too in that time. So it was, they put something together still. So you got to give the GM a lot of credit there. The Charlotte Hornets traded Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for Miles Bridges and 2 future second-round picks. Yeah, that one hurts to see nowadays. That's just your scouts didn't do a good enough job. And not that Miles Bridges, and we don't need to talk about all the other things Miles Bridges does off the basketball court, but on the basketball court, he's obviously extremely talented. But this is another example of the Charlotte Hornets not being very good when it comes to draft day. We've all seen the lists of all the like top 5 picks and stuff they've messed up, all the lottery picks just in general they've messed up. And this is just another one where they took the wrong player, right? And who knows what Shai becomes in that organization and everything, but obviously that was a miss. Oh, the Chicago Bulls, and I'm not surprised that it's this one. Wendell Carter, Otto Porter, and 2 first-round picks for Al-Farouq Aminu and Nikola Vucevic. All right, Bulls fan, rant time. Yeah, this trade, while it made me somewhat excited when it first happened because it was the first indication that the Bulls were willing to actually make a move to become better, I was certainly nervous at the time. I was like, okay, Vucevic is a very good player. He's going to be a good player for a while. He's developed the three-point shot a little bit. He's a double-double machine. He's always healthy, right? Knock on wood. I don't know why I'm knocking on wood. The Bulls aren't good this year anyway either. But it was like, okay, you traded Wendell. Like, Wendell is an undersized 5 that plays solid defense. He blocks a couple shots. He can stretch a little bit. Who knows where his ceiling is? But you traded the 2 first-round picks for him, which seemed like a bit of an overpay at the time, and it has proven to be that. Not that you didn't get the player that you thought you were getting in Vucevic. It's just it wasn't the right player to go get. I think more so was the problem, because Vucevic has still been like a very good basketball player. I maintain the fact that the Bulls have probably the best scoring trio in the NBA, but they just don't work together to actually win basketball games. So that's where the struggle is with this trade, right? It's an unfortunate mistake that they've made that's now costing them. Shout out Al-Farouq Aminu too. He didn't do anything while wearing a Bulls jersey. The Cleveland Cavaliers, Kyrie Irving to the Celtics for Jay Crowder, Isaiah Thomas, Ante Zizic, I believe that was how you said his name, a first-round pick, and a future second. Yeah, this one's a tough one to look at. Obviously, you were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. You had to make a deal like before the season started. It was pretty close to when the season started, if I remember correctly. And it was like, okay, how do you even get close to a value for Kyrie Irving? I don't know what else they could have gotten at that time, but obviously, like, Jay Crowder, solid role player. Isaiah Thomas was just coming off an injury and everything, but he was at the time a very, very good player. Unfortunately, he just never captured that talent and that stardom again after his injuries. Zizic didn't really do much for them. I don't know what that future first-round pick turned into. Does it say here? The first-round pick was used on Colin Sexton, who, good scorer, pretty horrendous defender in the NBA. The second rounder was Skylar Mays. Yeah, I was going to say he's on a 2-way contract with Portland this year. So, yeah, you didn't really do much with this, because what ended up happening with Sexton, he's with Utah now, along with Lauri Markkanen. I guess that turned into Donovan Mitchell eventually. You had to give up a lot more picks, though, for it. At the end of the day, you lost out on Kyrie Irving, which, again, off-court stuff aside, phenomenal basketball player, and unfortunately kind of tore your big 3 up, which was probably reaching the end of its days just because Kevin Love was getting a lot older. But who knows? If you would have been able to keep those two together, you probably could have found a way to get a third star on that team, but who knows? Anything in retrospect, right? The Dallas Mavericks, DeAndre Jordan, Wesley Matthews, Dennis Smith Jr. Oh, what a tragedy, his career. And 2 future first-round picks for Kristaps Porzingis, Trey Burke, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Courtney Lee. So at the time, this was 3 starter-level players that they had traded, right? Like Wesley Matthews was a snipe shooter, DeAndre Jordan could still jump, and Dennis Smith Jr. was coming off a very promising rookie season. I'm so bummed that his career like didn't work out after that, because he looked so good in like his first season and a half with Dallas, because they were even making it work with him and Luka. It's just you went to New York at that point, and basically that's when where your career went to die. Now at the time, I think the move made a lot of sense, bringing in a guy like Porzingis to play next to Luka. I just think these two probably just weren't maybe ready maturity wise to make the basketball side of it work. Kristaps was also hurt a decent amount when he was with the Mavericks, and like I said, in theory, it makes so much sense. Seeing the Porzingis that we see now in Boston, like this would be a match made in heaven. But coulda, woulda, shoulda. The Knicks, on the other hand, they got a couple picks. What did these picks turn into? Does it say on here? First round pick was spent on Keon Johnson. Yeah, okay. So Knicks didn't do anything with it anyway. So whatever. But yeah, the Knicks kind of just lost Porzingis in a way, too. This was just a bad trade. Denver Nuggets, interesting. Donovan Mitchell to the Utah Jazz for Tyler Lydon and Trey Lyles. This is one where I actually will say that, like, because a lot of times in the draft, who knows what players become, right? This one is a big flop. Anybody that actually watched Donovan Mitchell in his time at Louisville knew he was going to be just like a stud at the NBA level. It's just I believe he tore his ACL in his freshman year. I think that's what happened, or like something like that. And so he went back for like his sophomore year. I don't exactly remember. But when you saw him play, you were like, this dude is an NBA stud. And anybody that didn't know that just wasn't paying attention. And that seems like what the Denver Nuggets did here. You took Trey Lyles, who when Trey Lyles was in college, you had no idea what position he was going to play. And obviously he's still in the NBA and a decent contributor, so I'm not saying he's not a bad player. But you knew what his ceiling was very early on. You were like, he's going to be a solid 7 to 8 point per game guy. He's your typical 77 to 78 overall in 2K, if you want a comparison that way. He does everything okay, just not anything great. And that's fine. That's a quality player. But when you had the option to go get like a guy like Donovan Mitchell, especially in a time where the Nuggets weren't necessarily blowing people away, could have had a stud in the making. You could have had a stud in the making. If he developed in Utah, he definitely could have developed in Denver. The Detroit Pistons. See, I'm already about to criticize this one a little bit. Chris Middleton and Brandon Knight and Slava Kratsov to the Milwaukee Bucks for Brandon Jennings. Okay, we're not going to pretend like this is like a horrible trade at the time. Brandon Jennings was an absolute hooper. For those of you that remember, he was an offensive superstar. Wasn't much of a defender or anything. They weren't really interested in keeping him around. They felt Brandon Knight better fit the team. Brandon Knight was a solid player at the time, came in and was a starter for the Bucks and everything. And Chris Middleton was a bench warmer at the time. Like this was essentially a Brandon Knight for Brandon Jennings trade. And Chris Middleton was just kind of thrown in as a supplement because Brandon Jennings was the more valuable player at the time. They were like, oh, this is a young guy that works hard. We'll see what he becomes. Like, there was nothing about Chris Middleton's game at the time that would have indicated how good of a player he'd end up becoming. So I don't think it's fair to criticize the Pistons for this trade. Like, sure, do they wish they had Chris Middleton? Sure, but it's not like they were close to winning anything anyway. What? He would have just been on those teams with Andre Drummond and Reggie Jackson, and that would have made them not get like just swept in the first round of the East every year? I don't think so. Golden State Warriors. Interesting. A top 20 protected first round pick and a 2021 second round pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder for Kelly Oubre Jr. I think the article puts this in a good way. The Warriors just haven't had a lot of like floppy trades. So I guess if you consider this Kelly Oubre trade a bad one, then that's the worst it gets. Then congratulations, Warriors. Just looking at Kelly Oubre's stats that year too, like you traded a first round pick for a guy that at the time was 25 and was getting you 15 points a game. He had just come off a season where he had scored 18 and a half points a game. And this is mostly just because he was playing with Steph Curry now that his numbers dropped. Yes, he wasn't very efficient, but like, look, the article itself says this isn't that bad of a trade. But if we're analyzing it, no, at the time, it kind of made sense. You were trying to keep the Warriors afloat until Klay Thompson got back. The Houston Rockets. Oh boy, yeah, this could be a couple things. Chris Paul, 2 first-round picks and 2 first-round pick swaps to OKC for Russell Westbrook. People forget that Chris Paul and James Harden low-key was working for a while there while they were in the playoffs. It's just Chris Paul got hurt, and then they couldn't get by the Warriors that year. They had him. Like, who knows how it actually works out and everything, but like the Chris Paul James Harden team was low key working. And then, yes, they went and said, okay, Russell Westbrook, younger, right? Was coming off MVP type seasons and stuff. Let's pair him with James Harden. And that combo just did not work at all. Both of these players suffer from, surprise, surprise, what I'm going to call this, but I actually use this term when I'm coaching, James Harden disease, where when they don't have the basketball, they have no idea what to do on the court and they just kind of float around. And because of the offense that the Rockets ran, it really allowed teams to collapse on whichever one of them had the ball at all times. And if one of them was off the court, you kind of just focused in on that player in their entirety. And don't get me wrong, they still put up numbers and stuff because they're great, but it wasn't translating to any winning basketball. And this was probably the beginning of OKC saying, okay, how hard would it be to obtain everybody's first round picks for the next like 6 years? Let's just see what we can do. So I think it's hard to say, like, for OKC, what this is really materialized into. Have these picks been conveyed yet? No, but one of them is coming this next draft, interestingly enough. And Houston's not exactly going to be a very good basketball team, so we will wait and see what OKC does with these picks. Indiana Pacers, Kawhi Leonard, Davis Bertans, and never heard of this guy, Arizem Lorbeck to the Spurs for George Hill. So for some initial perspective, George Hill was just coming off a season where he hardly started. Interestingly enough, he had started a little bit the year before. Obviously, Tony Parker's there and everything, but he was a very solid bench player. He was getting you 11 points a game. He was shooting well from three. He was just putting up some quality numbers, and he was a 24-year-old at the time, so a young guy that was capable of being a starting point guard in the NBA. Trading a middle of the pack first round pick doesn't look that crazy. It just so happens that this person's Kawhi Leonard. And yes, you have to shame an organization somewhat for not realizing the talents and abilities of a player, right? Kind of like what we talked about before. But at the end of the day, that only holds so much value. It's important to remember as well that a lot of times it's not like this team said, okay, we're going to take Kawhi Leonard and now we're trading him here. A lot of times they make the pick in principle for the other team because the trade's already agreed upon and they can't actually make the trade at that point more often than not. So the Spurs call up the Pacers and say, hey, we want Kawhi Leonard, take Kawhi Leonard with the pick and we'll make this trade happen. And the Pacers say, okay. And that's how it goes down. So it's a little clickbaity to say they traded Kawhi Leonard for George Hill. Oh boy. Yeah, no, I don't think it's as crazy of a trade as one may think, but yeah, it sucks that they could have had Kawhi. The Clippers, yeah, this was one of the first trades that came to mind when I decided this was the video I was going to make. So Gallinari, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 5 first-round picks and 2 first-round pick swaps for Paul George. So let's get something straight here. Paul George is a very, very, very good basketball player. One of the best two-way players in the NBA. He's figured out how to play without the basketball. He's constantly evolving his game. He's very humble, right? He's accepted whatever role he has, and he's excelled in everything he's ever done in the NBA. I know the whole playoff P thing is a thing or whatever, right? And I mean, he'll be the first to tell you maybe he's not a first option on a contending team, but Paul George is a phenomenal basketball player. This many picks though to go get him. I know you're like, we're getting Kawhi, we're getting PG, we're just gonna make it happen however we have to. But man, and you didn't realize at the time how good Shai could become. And Shai, I probably say, is better than Paul George now. I think that's fair to say, and that's a real testament to Shai, if anything else. But man, like, you fumbled with that one. You did kind of fumble with that one. Now, maybe the Clippers are going to win it this year, but I'm 3 games into watching the Clippers with James Harden at the point of recording this, and it doesn't look good. So I would say this is an L for the Clippers. Los Angeles Lakers, KCP, Montrezl Harrell, Kyle Kuzma to the Wizards. Isaiah Jackson to the Pacers. Oh, I forgot he was included in that. Russell Westbrook and 3 second-round picks to the Lakers. So yeah, my initial reaction to this at the time was definitely like, yo, what are the Lakers doing? Because at the time as well, they had like no shooters on this roster. It was so hodgepodge put together. Like, you knew that team wasn't going to have any success. And the way Westbrook was being forced to play on that team wasn't working. I'm not like the biggest Westbrook fan ever. I was quoted when I was younger saying I'll take Kemba Walker over Russell Westbrook, not in terms of talent, but I'd rather have him on my team because he's more of a winner than Westbrook is. Westbrook kind of fed off a lot of those empty stats and stuff that we had kind of talked about before. But don't get me wrong, Russell Westbrook's a phenomenal player, a phenomenal competitor. You'd be lucky to have him on your team, and you just have to keep him in line, right? And keep him in a specific game plan, and he's really going to help you. And I think he does help like the Clippers a lot in the modern day right now. Yeah, at the time you traded quality role players in like KCP, who was now a starter on a championship team, Kyle Kuzma, who probably excelled and would have worked well next to Anthony Davis if you gave them the chance to develop. It's hard to say, right? But knowing the player that Kyle Kuzma is now, he fits pretty well in that role. Montrezl Harrell's kind of like whatever, but yeah, and you gave up a lot of those second round pick assets to get him, especially when like all you really got was a name at that point. The basketball fit of it just made no sense to anybody. And obviously the Lakers have since kind of rebounded from that and they've put together a solid roster. But yeah, at the time, no, it made no sense. Memphis Grizzlies, what are we saying here? Brandon Boston Jr., Trey Murphy, and Valanciunas to the Pelicans for Tyler Harvey went to the Hornets. Zaire Williams, Steven Adams, Eric Bledsoe, and Jared Butler, and 2 future second-round picks came back. I don't know. Like, I just kind of looked over this for a second. I don't think it's like that crazy. Like, don't get me wrong, Trey Murphy is probably the best player getting moved in this now. At the time, probably hard to say. Valanciunas is a much different player than Steven Adams, but Steven Adams has been critical to any success the Grizzlies have had. So I think that's fair to say. Bledsoe was pretty solid for him in his like remaining time there, and Zaire Williams is like a role player for them now. So I don't know. I don't think that's that crazy of a deal at the end of the day. And maybe this is something to say like, hey, the Grizzlies have actually done a pretty good job making trades. I feel like the Grizzlies just don't make a lot of trades in general. I know they just did the whole Marcus Smart one, but I don't know. I just feel like they're one of those organizations that don't do that much, but maybe I'm more so holding on to those grit and grind Grizzlies days. The Miami Heat, the trade, Bojan Bogdanovic to the Timberwolves for Norris Cole. This is really the worst trade the Miami Heat's had in the past, ever, I guess, in the past couple years. I don't remember what the time range is for this, but like Bogdanovic wasn't in the NBA at the time. He was playing overseas, and Norris Cole was like the 30th pick or something in that draft. He was like the end of the first round. So it was a lot of, you basically traded 2 mystery boxes. Norris Cole had a solid little career too. He was just like kind of a scrappy defensive young player on those like championship Heat teams. So you got something solid out of it. Obviously, Bogdanovic is now a very, very quality NBA player that can go get you 20 points at any given night, but there was no way of assuming that. So props to the Miami Heat for not ever making bad trades. The Milwaukee Bucks, Norman Powell and a future first-round pick to the Toronto Raptors for Grievous Vasquez. Why do they have a picture of Bobby Portis and Tobias Harris here? I'm not sure I understand. It says, this trade was rough. This swap executed during the 2015 draft looks terrifying. Realizing that the draft pick eventually produced OG Anunoby. Yeah, that was a middle of the pack first round pick. Between him, Norman Powell, they could have had a feisty two-way thing going on. Like, sure. Grievous Vasquez was like a solid NBA player for a while, though. Yeah, you essentially traded for a backup point guard that got you damn near double-digit points. He shot 40% from 3 on like 4 attempts, or wait, no, 38% on like 4 attempts a game. That's pretty quality, and he got you some assists along the way. He was a playmaker. Vasquez was a decent defender too. So I don't know. That's not really all that bad when you look at it. The reason they have this picture is they're talking about this trade that they made here that sent Tobias Harris plus Doran Lamb, Bino Udrih for JJ Redick at the time. So I guess they're kind of saying that pick was worse. At the time, it wasn't. But yeah, no, I don't think this trade's all that nasty at the end of the day. Like, sure, did it work out better for the Raptors overall? But, I mean, I don't know. At the time, it didn't seem that crazy. The Minnesota Timberwolves. And this is being recorded at a time where the Timberwolves are absolutely rocking the NBA right now. And it's very exciting to see. I'm a huge Edwards fan, and I live in Minneapolis. I'm not a Timberwolves fan, but it's cool to see all the locals here excited about it, and they should be. But yeah, Malik Beasley, Patrick Beverly, Leandro Balmaro, who still really hasn't done anything, and Walker Kessler. That's the tough one, with Jared Vanderbilt as well. 4 first-round picks and a first-round pick swapped to the Jazz for Rudy Gobert. I can't talk anymore. All right, let's talk about Rudy Gobert first. Rudy Gobert is having an excellent season for the Timberwolves. Last year, it didn't work well. They couldn't really gel anything together. He tried to fight someone on the team. I don't even remember who exactly it was. Was it Kyle Anderson? I think it was Kyle Anderson. But at the end of the day, Rudy Gobert is currently the leader in defensive net rating and just defensive ratings in general in the NBA, and the Timberwolves have the number one defense in the NBA, and it's in large part to Rudy Gobert. Everywhere Rudy Gobert goes, phenomenal defense follows. He's probably the greatest defensive player of this generation of basketball. Nothing's really going to change that. But yeah, I remember when this trade went down, my quote that I told all the Timberwolves fans was, I was like, I love this trade except for the fact that you gave up Walker Kessler. Just because I had seen him like play in college, and I was like, wow, that guy could be Rudy Gobert one in like however many years, right? I didn't think he'd get this good this fast and this productive, but I was like, oh man, I would have liked to have seen how he would develop. I thought that was a great draft by them. That was a guy they actually did pick in the draft too. They were like, we want Walker Kessler because we're looking for essentially a Rudy Gobert. But at the time, I was like, no, you know what? That's probably what you got to give up for Rudy. Now people hold their draft picks a little tighter because of this trade, so it definitely sent some shockwaves around the league. But at the time, I didn't think it was that crazy. Looking at it now, it seems pretty wild, but it's working for the Wolves right now. Low-key, the biggest loss of this might have been Patrick Beverley. Everybody loved that motherfucker in Minnesota. My God. New Orleans Pelicans. Chris Paul, a future second-round pick, and cash to the Clippers for Al-Farouq Aminu, Eric Gordon, Chris Kaman, and a first-round pick. These were such simpler times in the NBA. I remember this happening when I was a wee lad. So yeah, Chris Paul was the best point guard in basketball at this point. Famously, they had tried to trade him to the Lakers for like Pau Gasol, and the NBA stepped in and said, we cannot allow Chris Paul and Kobe Bryant to be on the same team. Think about the quality of the league. Oh my gosh, David Stern's probably rolling in his grave now seeing the trades that are happening nowadays with Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo on the same team. If he saw the starting lineup the Celtics had this year, I think he would have just died on the spot. But yes, we look at this trade with the perspective we have now, and it wasn't it. Like, Chris Paul didn't want to be there anymore, right? They were trying to move him. They were kind of trying to go into rebuild mode. So they got Al-Farouq Aminu, who at the time was a younger guy. He ended up starting a lot of games for them, a quality defensive player, not much else. They got Eric Gordon, who was constantly injured at the time, but he was a 20-plus point a game scorer given on a Clippers team that had nobody else that can score, right? He's an empty calorie guy. And Chris Kaman, who was, I believe he was a one-time All-Star in the NBA. Let me check that. Yeah, look at this. Chris Kaman, one-time All-Star. And at the time this trade, yeah, it would have been just when he was kind of coming off like an All-Star season. Again, on the Clippers, empty calories. They weren't a very good team. We understand that. And he had kind of had an injury-riddled season just like Eric Gordon. But you did get quality players. But at the end of the day, you lost out on Chris Paul, and all you got was a first-round pick. Does it say what that first-round pick turned into? Ooh, that pick was later spent on Austin Rivers. Yeah, that sucks. This was a bad trade. Sorry, New Orleans. The New York Knicks. I didn't even think of this one. Marcus Camby, Steve Novak, Quentin Richardson, a future first-round pick, and 2 seconds for Andrea Bargnani. For those of you that don't know who Andrea Bargnani is, he was a first overall pick by the Toronto Raptors. He was kind of supposed to be what Kristaps Porzingis is. He could shoot a little bit. He could move a little bit, right? He was coming from overseas. They were like, oh, he's not going to be the next Darko. And in all fairness, he had a pretty solid start to his career. Like, look at these first couple of years here. Like, you got 11, 10, you went up to 15, 17. How many rebounds are you getting to? You're getting like 6 or so. I mean, he was probably playing like the 4. You got 21 points out of him here, 19 out of him here. And then he kind of started to get hurt around this time, it looks like. And then, yes, he got traded there. The Knicks are like, we can reclaim his glory. And as you can see, they did not. Basically, as soon as Bargnani got to New York, it was kind of the fall of his career. You know, he put up some numbers while he was there, you know, got you 13, 14 points a game. But was it really worth losing these guys? I mean, given they were older players and stuff, but you did give up a future, like, picks for these guys to try and pair him with Melo to make something happen. But it wasn't the best way to use your assets. Thinking about it too, I don't think Marcus Camby and Quentin Richardson like ever actually played for the Raptors either. So like I think like they just kind of like fell off after that. But like I said, it's more so the picks and everything in a time where you were trying to put a good team around Melo. It's just an unfortunate use of assets. Oh yeah, look at this as well. The pick actually became a decent player in Jakob Poeltl. Yeah, that's a nice little player. Yeah, sorry Knicks, that's a rough one. Oklahoma City Thunder, Jaden McDaniels, and Ricky Rubio to the Minnesota Timberwolves and Emmanuel Quickley to the Knicks. James Johnson, Alexei Pokashevsky, and a future second round pick to the Thunder. Yeah, this one just doesn't look good on paper, y'all. It doesn't look good on paper. All the worst players ended up on the Thunder here. They got a future second though. But yeah, no, like they lost out on McDaniels, who now is like a max contract type player. He's possibly a defensive player of the year type guy. He's a great 3-and-D guy. Ricky Rubio at the time was just a solid player. It was cool to see him go back to Minnesota. I was a big fan of that. Emmanuel Quickly is one of the better bench players in the NBA, can just really go get you some buckets. All you walked away with, though, was James Johnson and Pokashevsky, there was some mumblings for a while. They were like, oh, look at this unicorn or whatever. It's like, yeah, you found a 7'1" guy that can kind of dribble a little bit and shoot a little bit. Man, he had the craziest jump shot or whatever. Not like it looked that crazy, but just the fact that he looked like a point guard when he shot the ball, just like for how like quickly he got up to like release and everything. But yeah, no, you got none of the best players in this move. Sorry, OKC. Orlando Magic. Oh, they didn't bold this. Y'all do better, Bleacher Report. Ersan Ilyasova, Victor Oladipo, and Domantas Sabonis to the Thunder for Serge Ibaka. Yeah, no, this trade just made no sense. Like, what were the Magic like trying to put together here? Like, the Magic are so annoying to me. Like, they can't like take players in and actually develop them. Like, they've had quality players come through their organization, and nobody actually gets any better while they're there. Shout out to Banchero and Franz, who are kind of figuring it out more so because they're going and playing overseas basketball in the offseason. But yeah, no, they lost out on Sabonis and Oladipo in this move. And we all know Oladipo ended up becoming like an all-star. Obviously, he's since kind of fallen off due to injuries, but Sabonis, multiple-time all-star, now all-NBA type player as well. You gave up 2 budding young players for a guy that didn't really do much at all for you. Here it is, the 76ers, Jason Tatum, and a future first-round pick to the Boston Celtics for Markelle Fultz. This is just simple. Scouts didn't do the right job, right? They didn't do the right job. And you know what? Do we really need to say anything more than that? Markelle Fultz is a fine NBA player now that he's out of Philly and everything. Jason Tatum's elite. You just didn't do your homework well enough. Sorry, Philly. The Phoenix Suns, DeAnthony Melton, Josh Jackson, and 2 second-round picks to the Grizzlies for Javon Carter and Kyle Korver. I don't even remember this trade. I don't really have much to say about this deal. Yes, DeAnthony Melton has turned into a starter quality player in the NBA, and they just kind of didn't want Josh Jackson on their team anymore. And you don't have either of these guys anymore. But Javon Carter is a solid player. Kyle Korver was a solid player. So I don't know. I don't think it's that crazy of a move. It definitely wasn't a crazy move at the time. Portland Trailblazers. Oh, Norman Powell involved in another one here. Norman Powell and Robert Covington to the Clippers for Eric Bledsoe. Eric Bledsoe involved in another one. Keon Johnson. I didn't realize Keon Johnson's been involved in so many trades. Why do people want this guy so much? And Justice Winslow and a 2025 second-round pick. I like what this article says here, though, that Portland's biggest mistake has always been in free agency, and I think that's 100% correct. The Evan Turner thing, they gave Alan Crabb a bunch of money that year, too. It's just, it wasn't good. But, yeah, no, it sucks that you gave away young guys like Norman Powell and Covington, who was still a productive player, for guys that just didn't do anything for you there. Justice Winslow had a moment where they were like, oh, are the Portland Trailblazers figuring out finally how to unlock Justice Winslow? And then it just kind of all fell apart. So this is why y'all lost Lillard, Portland. You just never found a way to put or keep quality talent around Lillard. And that's just the story of their franchise. Sacramento Kings, they traded Gary Trent Jr. to the Blazers for 2 second-round picks in cash. You know, at one point, I would have thought this would have been the Tyrese Halliburton for Sabonis trade, but obviously that's kind of just found a way to work out for both franchises. I still can't believe that deal went through, but I don't know. I don't think this deal's that crazy. Gary Trent wasn't anything. Yeah, he didn't immediately pop, but once he did, right? That's kind of the thing. Yeah, now he's a very quality basketball player. He's a starter on maybe, I'd say 40% of the NBA, right? And if not, he's a very, very good bench player. So the Kings just didn't really get anything for him. So yeah, I guess bad trade in that for not realizing the value or the upside in Gary Trent. The San Antonio Spurs, Kawhi Leonard to the Raptors for DeMar DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl, and a first-round pick. So yeah, this is another one where it's what were you supposed to do? Kawhi Leonard didn't show up to the Spurs facility for a whole year, and nobody knew what was going on with him. He was hurt apparently. We knew he wanted to go to a different franchise. Basically, he just went to another team so that he could then enter free agency and go to the Clippers. That was the plan all along. So you had to get something for him. So you got DeMar DeRozan, you got Jakob Poeltl. Jakob Poeltl's a very nice player. You got a first-round pick. What did that first-round pick turn into? It turned into Keldon Johnson. Yeah, Keldon Johnson's a nice player. All said and done, I don't think they did too bad with this. What did the Bulls end up giving them for DeMar DeRozan? I don't even remember. Does it say on here? Yeah, they got 2 more first-round picks out of DeRozan and Jakob Pertl. So, yeah, no, you didn't really do that bad. You basically rented decent talent for a little bit to have in your franchise and help develop young players that you eventually turned into some solid picks. All right, Toronto, what we got here? Kyle Lowry to the Heat for Precious Achiuwa and Goran Dragic. Yeah, that one looks kind of rough now. Like, essentially, the Raptors didn't want to pay Kyle Lowry all that much money, and he wanted to go to, like, a new team where he could compete still and everything, so he got sent to the Heat. But yeah, Precious Achiuwa hasn't really become anything in the NBA, and Goran Dragic basically was just there to fill salary. So yeah, you kind of just gave away one of your most beloved players in franchise history for nothing. And yeah, that's really the only take I have on that. What do we got now? Utah. Josh Hart and Thomas Bryant to the Lakers for Tony Bradley. I don't remember this trade happening either, but damn, yeah, that's an ugly trade. Tony Bradley's kind of just tall. That's his NBA career. He's just been tall. So good for Tony Bradley. Yeah, Josh Hart, obviously a very quality NBA player. He doesn't get a ton of burn on the Knicks right now, and that's kind of weird to me. I don't know what's wrong. Maybe he's a little bit banged up or whatever. I know he's a little bit banged up during Team USA or whatever, but who knows? And Thomas Bryant, quality big man in the NBA, plays with a lot of energy, gets dunked on by Wembanyama and has great reactions to things. So yeah, that's, again, we'll just chalk this up to a team not realizing that they had talent. Ooh, and finally the Washington Wizards, Jared Allen as a first round pick, Andrew Nicholson, shout out Andrew Nicholson, and Marcus Thornton. Yeah, I remember Marcus Thornton to the Brooklyn Nets for Bojan Bogdanovic and Chris McCullough. So at the time, this trade didn't seem like that crazy because the Wizards were actually like pretty solid. So they were like, okay, we go and get Bojan and we get this younger player and Chris, who never ended up becoming anything. He was a bum. But, and like, they didn't give up a ton. Like, Marcus Thornton was past his day. Andrew Nicholson is just cap space filler. And they were like, okay, but you can take a chance on this Jared Allen guy. It just looks bad because he became Jared Allen, who we all know today, which, again, do your homework and everything. But the Wizards weren't waiting for, like, another, like, young player to develop. Like, they had done that already. They were trying to get better then. So, low-key, like, still looks like a good trade in perspective of things. Like, yes, do you wish you had Jared Allen now? But at the time, they were happy to get Bojan. But yeah, y'all, that kind of does it. That was a fun one to look through. Let me know what other trades in the comments that you guys can think of that, you know, have just pissed you off as a basketball fan. But yeah, let me know some other videos ideas or what else you guys want to see me react to. But always appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you guys later. Thanks. Bye.